This podcast could potentially have adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly the possibility of sexual content. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Drinking with Authors. I am your host, Erica Lance. My co-host today is the amazing Bo Lake, and our guest today is Felice Zaslow. Welcome, Felice.
Woo! Hi, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Of course. Let's talk about what we're drinking. So I have one of my Drinking with Authors swag, which is faded. I think it's the first one I got. Anyway, I am drinking this thing called Nixie Sparkling Water. It's watermelon mint with gin in it, or watermelon mint water with, or gin with water. I don't know. Anyway, yes, that's what I'm doing. And it's very nice. It's very pleasant, effervescent for this afternoon. Bo, what are you drinking?
Well, today, as usual, I am drinking a Blue Moon because I love it. It's the only beer I really like.
And it matches your hair. I really think
always.
that's the key point and not the beer itself. But
yeah,
moving on. Felice, what are you drinking today?
Well, I'm not drinking any alcohol today, mostly because I usually drink when I go out and I'm with people out to dinner or whatever. And my favorite wine is a Riesling by Mont Saint Michel, and I couldn't find it at the wine store. So I'm drinking my favorite decaf tea. This says peace, love, and chocolate, no relation. My favorite decaf tea, which is peach, ginger peach. Very good.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Well, welcome to the show. So for our listeners who do not know you, what do you write?
Okay, so I published my first book because I hope to do a second. It is a memoir. I am a retired teacher, so I always did a lot of writing and taught writing as part of the curriculum. I always kept journals. I've studied screenwriting, memoir writing, fiction writing, and I published my first memoir called From Here: Lessons in Love and Loss from 9/11. And as a person who kept journals all of her life, when my husband Ira went missing on September 11th, I started writing and documenting everything that happened, and letters to him in addition. And by the end of that experience, into a few weeks, I had 7 journals filled, which eventually became my first manuscript.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that is a very interesting way of approaching it.
Yes.
So when did it get published? When did it go out?
It went out September 22nd of last year, of 2022.
Very cool.
Yeah. And the purpose of me writing the book initially was for me to heal, to purge, to heal, to move forward. And then it became about helping others who might be going through a dark night of the soul because of a tragic loss. And God knows we've had plenty since then. But I was by no means ready to take it on the road. I had an opportunity to publish with a small press in 2003, 2004, but I was not ready to go out talking about it. And I knew instinctively, I was guided that way as well, given guidance, that I needed to work on myself and heal through this, because it wasn't just the loss of my beloved spouse, but it was the way that it happened and the whole political aspect, and being a person who, I think I'm a pretty deep thinker. I wanted to know why, how could this happen? And I went on this great soul searching journey, which led me to studying all the world's religions. I almost became an interfaith minister, but I was still teaching, so I couldn't go through a 2-year program. But I studied with spiritual people like Carolyn Mace, who is an intuitive and medical healer. And she has a program where she trains people in spiritual lessons, spiritual knowledge. I was thinking who would be a role model for a 9/11 widow or a family member. And all I could come up with was a Holocaust survivor. And being of Jewish descent, I sought out Elie Wiesel. My daughter-in-law, Natalie, who is the then girlfriend of my son, Adam, was at Boston University where Professor Wiesel was a professor. And she got in touch with him, and he read my manuscript and wrote me a beautiful letter and to encourage me to keep circulating it around and get it published. But he passed away before I published it, so I couldn't get a review from him. But then I went on to study positives. I retired from my teaching career. I became the artist I always was, but didn't practice regularly. And that also got me more in touch with myself. I also was always fascinated by the mysteries of life and death and the spiritual world. And I've studied with some wonderful mediums and healers and enhanced my own ability, which I don't do as a prominent thing in my life, but it has certainly enriched my life. I'm more of a creative person, artist, writer. I spent a lot of time in nature. And in fact, the photo on the cover of my book is one that I took at the beach here on Long Island. And I met my husband at the beach, actually. So it's a theme in the book, yeah. And I still continue to keep journals. I have a gratitude journal that, thank you, Oprah, that I use until I forget for a while. I love to, there's a woman named Julia Cameron who wrote The Artist's Way, a book for recovering artists, how to get through all of the garbage so that you could focus on what you have to do. And it's kind of the Bible for aspiring writers and artists. And one of her tools was morning pages, which I got into long before my husband passed away. And I would get up in the morning and write a stream of consciousness for 4 pages. And after a while, you can see a theme in your life of what might be bothering you or what is very prominent or you need to work on. So that was a beautiful tool. And I do that still with lapses because I try all different kinds of things.
That sounds like you've gone on quite a journey with this.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm assuming a lot of this was done to be cathartic for you to get through the loss.
Initially, yes.
Yes. What about now that you've put it out there? Because, it's one thing when, me and Bo both write fiction books for the most part. I do write nonfiction, but they're usually work guides and things like that. They're not like personal guides, like personal to my thing. What was that like putting that out there?
Well, I didn't. It was very interesting. This book has had a long gestation period. Mm-hmm. And I only put it out to people who would give me feedback along the way. So it took me 19 years. I finished the initial manuscript in May or maybe late winter of 2003. So it was 19 years later that I picked it up again. And I picked it up again. It was always, I try to convince myself that because I gave it over to the 9/11 Memorial Museum to use excerpts as needed, then it was made public. But it always was the elephant in the room of my life poking at me. And I knew that it was one of the reasons that I am alive. It's part of my contract in this life to do this. So once I decided to do it, and it was the winter of it was last winter, 22, I had a health scare. I was supposed to have gone to Florida. I didn't go, and I'm fine. It was a scare. And because I didn't go to Florida for a few months, I took classes with a yoga teacher who I'm very fond of, who I know for some years. And she and a partner had put together a book called Yoga Through a Jewish Holiday Year, where they combine yoga with the wisdom that comes out of each holiday. And I was so impressed with the layout of the book and the cover design. And she so generously shared her book designer with me. And then I got a proofreader, even though I was an English major and I can proof for other people. But I had some other eagle eyes doing it. There's a daughter-in-law, Natalie, as well. Thank you, Natalie. And it didn't need all that much proofing. It just needed a little bit rearranging of some things. And now that we live in a woke culture, a more woke culture, hopefully, there were some things that were just not usable anymore. For example, I used a line, I shaded my eyes Indian style from the sun. But you can't say that anymore. It's not appropriate. It's not politically correct. So I had to change that line to, I shaded my eyes with my hand, so stuff like that. And I was inspired by Katie Couric's biography or memoir, Going There, where she included family photos and catchy titles for her chapters. And so I incorporated that. And I had a wonderful time doing it. And I worked very hard on it all through last summer. And then self-published it mostly. I say mostly because Erica, my book designer, has her own company, and I'm under her ISBN number. So it's a little bit, but it's basically on Amazon and through Barnes and Noble. And now I'm looking to do an audiobook because I've had many requests for that. Because I have a lot of older friends and they like to listen to things rather than read.
Well, I think audiobooks are a great thing. That's how I get most of my books these days because of driving, or I put audiobooks on when I'm doing chores, that because it's easier. You can walk around with your headphones on and listen to audiobooks when you're doing dishes or laundry or whatever. And, it's sort of, otherwise there's downtime. And for those of us that don't have downtime. So now that it's published and out in the world, what was the reaction like from strangers? Because you initially gave it to people who were going to review it, that you had a sort of a degree of trust, and now you've put this little baby out into the world all by its little lonesome. What was that like?
I'm very delighted at how well received it is, and it's been. And as I have done some speaking engagements locally, and then people who know me in other parts of the country have asked me to speak at their book groups. So I've done that on Zoom and in person, and that's been wonderful. And I'm just it's a very fulfilling venture for me, wonderfully fulfilling. Because it is as relevant today as it was 20 some odd years ago. One, because it's history. Two, I'm living history, so people want to hear from me. And if someone has a connection to me, that's valuable to them. They say, oh, I know the author, I'd like to bring her in. But it's also highly relevant because there's so much grief and terror and trauma in the world today. And when I saw the anguish on the faces of the family members of victims of school shootings and these mass shootings, I felt it. I knew what they were experiencing, because I had experienced a very similar kind of a feeling with my loss. And so I want those people and anyone going through a dark night of the soul and really struggling to know that there is a way through, and that I, an ordinary woman who has lived a pretty traditional life, not in my head, but in action, got through, and so can they, so can you. So if it brings comfort, it's done its job in that way.
Very, very cool. I think that's exactly what those books need to do. What is it like for you? Are you still living up near New York? Are you still there?
Believe it or not, I travel around a lot.
Mhm.
And have spent plenty of time at a significant other's house, etc., over the years, but visit my kids who are local. I am on Long Island in the same house my husband and I bought in 1975.
Oh, wow. Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Very cool. So you've started to get feedback. What did you try to go the traditional publishing route at first?
At first I did, and I had an offer from a small publisher, but I wasn't ready. And I wasn't sure the manuscript was ready. Oh, and I'm glad I didn't do it, because I got really great advice from the author of When Bad Things Happen to Good People, Rabbi Harold Kushner. I
Mhm.
go to Arizona every year for this an art trek, I call it, and do some artwork in the deserts. And I'm one with the swallows, and I often go to a spa there. So Rabbi Kushner was speaking at this particular spa, and I planned my trip around that. And wherever I went over the years, I brought my manuscript with me, because who knows? Who would you never know who you're going to run into or pick up some valuable information or tips. So he was speaking there at the time that I planned my trip, and I met with him, and we talked after his speaking engagement. He was a darling man, and he said, I would have counseled you to do exactly what you did after 9/11 if I knew you then, to keep journals, and the fact that you could create a manuscript worked really well. But I also would encourage you to go the self-publishing route, because and I quote him, I had to bastardize my manuscripts for a big publishing house to make them highly saleable and bring money in to the publisher, and himself as well. And he's a prolific writer. He said, but you're not going to want to pollute your story. After speaking with me, he picked that up, and I have this beautiful note from him. And he, well, when I was sitting there with him, he said, would you like me to read your manuscript? I said, oh, I would love that. Thank you. Here. So he took it home with him, and he read it, sent it back and emailed me a letter. And probably, I like to think he would have written a great review for me, but he had just lost his wife when I contacted where he used to work. And he was pretty ill. So out of respect, I didn't want to pursue that. But I have gotten beautiful reviews. Yeah, mostly 5 stars. A couple of sourpusses gave me 4. No,
I don't know that I'd consider those sourpusses, my
No.
friend.
No, four is great. 4 is great.
4 is great. I only got 2 4s out of 22. The rest are 5-star reviews. And 2 of my positive psychology colleagues wrote the reviews for my book, and it's just been great. And I'm getting some letters from people. I'm so happy you wrote this, Felice. It's given me hope. It's brought me comfort. And I'm going to share it with family members and friends. And that's how it's spreading. I'd say, as far as promoting the book. Half of the promotion has been good self-promotion. And being the age I am, which I'm 73,
Mm-hmm.
I've been a part of so many communities over the years of my life that I've reached out to them, and because they know me, they're happy, to do this, to read it, to spread the word, and that's been wonderful.
So you chose to go the self-publishing route. Did you take some courses in the marketing and stuff like that goes along with that?
No,
No?
no, I didn't know they were even available. Is that available on Amazon?
Oh, not on Amazon. There's a ton of marketing courses for authors and stuff like that you can look up how to do the marketing for yourself, because that is a whole thing to do the marketing, right? So have you done any in-person signings yet?
Yes, I have.
What was that like?
That was fun. That was delightful. And especially, I did one book group in Florida where they had a special meeting of their book group because I happened to be in town. And then more people from the community came, and I sold a whole bunch of books and wrote nice things to the people, especially if I knew them personally or knew something about them. And then the local beauty salon had me in for a book signing.
Oh, that's very cool.
That was interesting. And I'm going to do one May 4th at the local synagogue where I used to be a full-time member. I'm now an associate member because I'm not here full-time. And going to do a book talk about the history of how this book came to be.
Very
And do a reading, a Q&A, and a book signing. And that should draw a bunch of people. Yeah, so, and I also want to give back because that community, the synagogue community, the general community here where I live, the school community where I taught at the time, just enveloped my family and me. So we had tremendous support. And I think we would have had plenty of support had it not been a national tragedy. But because it was an attack on America, everyone felt it. So, which in its own way gave us more support.
And I was going to ask about that. So I think it's very different, kind of like what happened with COVID, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
not opening that can of worms again right now.
Right.
But different places in the country had different reactions to the situation. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
This tragedy happened in New York. Yes, it was a national tragedy, and it also happened in DC, not taking away
Yes.
from that either, right? But what was that like when you're in the community where this ground zero sort of has happened, right? Versus as you were kind of filling out this book and probably broadening the community and talking to people who were outside, but what was the difference being there versus as it was a national story?
Yes. What was the difference, say, if I went to ground zero and were with people?
Well, you having lost your husband and it were part of that exact situation, right? There was a community and there was the New York community.
Yeah.
Did this versus it becoming on a national stage, because not that it couldn't be felt in Montana, and I'm not saying it wasn't, but was it felt? It's not felt as hard in Montana, and I'm just picking a random state. So nobody send me hate mail. Versus what happened in New York, right?
Oh, sure. It was in the New York and metropolitan area, surrounding states. It was all consuming.
Okay.
And all we saw in the news were the towers being hit and falling and all. And so how I dealt with that was I decided to that I needed to grieve the loss of my husband and then deal with the other stuff. I had a full-time job after school, filling out paperwork. It was tremendous, all the stuff that had to be done because of that. But along the way, I was in a trade center support group. It started in November of 01, and then we all exited. That was very interesting. They were all widows, except two of the widows, my friends and I, we became friends, brought our sons. My younger son was living at home at the time, and her son as well. And they came, and there was a young man who survived 9/11, the 93 bombing of the Trade Center, and some other great tragedy. And he had, with his tremendous survivor skill, just wanted to help everyone. That was interesting. I got in touch with Harvey Kushner, who was a terrorism expert and a consultant for the government, I think under Bush, and maybe the administration before that. And he came to speak at my synagogue. I brought him to the Trade Center support group. And then I was 9/11'd out. and I got very good counsel. My husband worked for Lehman Brothers. He was the only employee missing. And he was, my first prayer was when I finally accepted after 10 days, he wasn't coming home. And a detective showed me emails as to his whereabouts. So that was obvious. I said, please God, I've got to have his body. We need to have a funeral, and I need something of his. And I got both of those wishes were answered. So there's a humorous scene where I went to pick out a cemetery plot, and I was freaking out because I had to get a double plot, one for me too. I wasn't ready to think about my own death, you know. But there's humor in my book as well, because there's humor in everything, and you have to laugh sometimes at the craziness. So to stick to your question, it was right after when I was at home. I was home for 10 days before I went back to work. And there was traffic in and out, in and out. I had close friends monitoring it and taking care of the phones. And after a while, that died down. And finally, the Lehman people came to my home, and I was here with one son. I have two. My older one was married and on his own, and, you know, not living with us, but close by. And I had no choice but to accept that Ira was not coming back. And Lehman had hired a social worker who called me every day from the second day on, and to work with me, to help me look at my own resources and the career I had created and the structure I needed in order to move out of that lockdown at home. And after 10 days, I went back to school, and that was very interesting. Everybody had been alerted that I was coming back. And I sat down in my first class. I was on a stool at the front of the classroom, and I looked at all these kids who I only knew for a week or two, because there was only a couple of weeks before 9/11. And I looked at them and I said, I'm happy to answer. I'm very happy to be back, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have. And all I got were stares. And they were so counseled for so many days. They were 9/11'd out, and they just wanted their teacher back and life as normal. And that was when I taught my first lesson, and I got back into the swing. And yeah, so I thank God I had a job that I loved that I went back to. And then by after the new year, I started feeling better. You know, you go into that tunnel of darkness as the days get shorter, and then the days after the holidays, after New Year's, you could know that they start getting a little bit longer, and I joined a bereavement group, which is just strictly a bereavement group. And I walked in and I saw all of these vibrant, attractive women, all of them younger than me. They were in their 40s. I was 52. There was another person my age. And I looked at all of them and I thought to myself, they're going to be all right. And then I knew I would be all right. So that was a supportive thing. And then you work your way through that and outgrow that as well and go on to the next thing. As far as what was going on in the city here, Rudolph Giuliani, who I have a lot to say about now, but back then he was my hero because he took charge in such a positive way of New York City that we weren't fearful, because people were worried about what could happen next. The government hired Hollywood screenwriters to imagine what terrorists could do next. The Israelis were brought over to train the NYPD. Yeah, so the Israeli people from the army.
Yeah.
And so there was quite a lot to address, and I knew I could not handle all of it at once. So I took it in small doses, and I got some very, very wise advice from a doctor who was in my life at that time. And she said, don't look at those images. Don't look at them. It's going to traumatize you. And I think the people who were down there were more traumatized by it than I was. Yeah. And I did go after 9/11 down to ground zero, which was called the Pit at the time. And I was at the family center down there where they addressed some of our needs. I hope I answered your question.
You did. So, and I appreciate that. And it sounds like it was definitely a huge journey, which I can't even imagine. You talked about, though, at the beginning that you're looking at doing more writing.
Yes.
So what are you looking at doing more writing on, or are you doing more writing right now?
Well, I do a lot of journal writing. I took a course called Stories of My Life, and a lot of interesting things came out of that. I think I would like my next book to be about the spiritual side of life, and that my faith in God, not just via my religion and via all religions.
Okay.
Because I studied all the world's religions and they all come back to the same thing. Everybody's journey, the soul's journey back to God. And I believe that the soul is eternal. In fact, I know it is. I have had many experiences with souls who have crossed over. And I might like to gather other people's stories and share a book of how people cope with loss. And it's not completely formulated yet. That's one idea. I also wrote a screenplay years ago that I'd like to turn into a book, a
Okay.
fiction.
What is that about?
Oh, that's interesting. That's a story about well, the basic components are a psychology professor and a detective, and it takes place during the Cold War.
Oh.
When we, America, had remote viewers. I'm very fascinated by all that stuff. Remote viewing is when you send your mind out to locate an object or a person or a thing.
Okay.
Yes, and it's we did that. We had, I think it was called Project Stargate. I don't quite remember, but
Okay.
in the 60s that existed, and people who had some psychic ability were trained to, in remote viewing, to detect where there may be missiles that were threatening us. It takes place during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
So they were using their minds to do that?
Oh, yes, yes. And they would practice, and somebody would be on one side of a wall and draw a picture of a place, and the remote viewer would try to locate where in this picture a certain thing was. And they got better and better at it. There are people who do that still today. I never took any training in it, but I'd love to. I find that fascinating. And
Did
I
that
use-
work? Did they
Yeah.
actually find missiles?
I believe so.
Oh,
I don't
that is-
know everything. Yeah, and look, there are people who locate missing people too. I don't know if it's the exact same way of doing things. They may get messages from souls who have crossed over. But that I've always been intrigued by the spiritual world, the unseen world.
That's very cool. So when do you think you're going to start working on that?
Well, I feel like I have to give this book, because of its importance to me, my family, America, and the world, at least a year. So I'm not going to say I won't start writing, in a structured way soon, but I'm still very excited about my current book and everything that's planned.
Very, very cool. That is very awesome. Okay, cool. Okay, so what advice would you give authors out there? Since you're a new author, kind of just went through this, what piece of advice would you give authors?
Think about why you want to be an author, because the why is very important. And I trace that back in myself. The other thing is, don't give up on it. It's okay if it goes away for a while, you put it on the back burner. But if something's poking at you, bring it back in. If I can do it, you can too, if you really want to. Persevere.
That's good advice.
I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, so shameless self-promotion time. Where do people find you and your books?
My book is on Amazon and can be ordered through Barnes and Noble as well. And on my website, felicezaslow.com. And if they order it through the website, then I can send directly to them, if they give me their address, a signed copy.
Oh, very, very cool. I'm sure people will love that. Well, it was wonderful having you on the show with us, Felice.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Uh-oh.
She froze.
Well, that is your host, Erica Lance, and I am your co-host, Bo Lake.
I will get this. It's called Gin, Bo. Too much judgment.
You told me to cover for you if your internet went out, so I was doing my task. You don't let me
Okay,
talk
you
at
do your
all.
cover. Okay, you wrap it up, Bo.
Thank you for listening to Drinking with Authors. You should like and subscribe and review. And our guest has been Felice. There you go.
There you go. We'll see you guys next time.
I'm